each individual has their own beautiful magic inside, just waiting to be discovered, and their own gifts to share with the world. So get curious about that.
Welcome to the Water Prairie Chronicles, a podcast created for special needs parents and those who want to support them. I'm your host, Tonya Wallum, and I'm glad you're here. How does growing up with a sibling on the autism spectrum shape your view of the world? Today I'm joined by Sarah Boss, who shares a powerful story about her brother Michael and the importance of empathy, compassion, and belonging. Sarah speaks openly about the challenges faced by families with autistic children and offers valuable advice for parents seeking support. This episode is a reminder that embracing differences fosters connection and creates a more inclusive world. Whether you want to have a deeper understanding of autism and how it impacts families, or simply want to be inspired by a story of love between siblings, then stay tuned and get ready to be touched by Sarah's story. This episode is sponsored by the Water Prairie Etsy shop, where you can find Tales in a Tote story kits for young children and printable storytelling journals and activity books to help encourage older children to enjoy writing their own stories. Check out the shop at waterprairie.etsy.com and be sure to sign up for the Water Prairie newsletter for special Etsy promo codes. Now, let's get back to the episode. Well, Sarah, welcome to Water Prairie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you reaching out. The topic that we're going to be talking about is one that I haven't brought before. I've talked to other siblings who have had a sibling with different disabilities, but we haven't addressed this with autism before. And so I was really excited whenever you offered this as a possible topic we could talk about. So in our earlier communication, you mentioned empathy, compassion, and belonging that your brother instilled in you. Can you share a specific story or a memory that demonstrates this?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's one memory in particular that sticks out. I was around 10 years old, which would have made my brother 14, and we went on the bus together. And my brother, Michael, that was his name, when he would go into the bus, so he had rituals. So he couldn't, for example, sit down once, but he would go up and down, up and down, up and down. And then there were always a lot of facial expressions, grimaces, sometimes that would happen, clicking, that sort of thing of his teeth. And so we were in the bus, and we got into the bus, and he was doing a ritual, one of his rituals. And there were a number of people, who actually moved away. And I remember being so struck at that age, and, especially when you're 10 and you're kind of, learning about the world around you, that why would these people be moving away when, from somebody, from essentially, they were moving away from something that they didn't understand. So there's the fear of the unknown, right? Of the thing that you don't get. But he wasn't somebody who was harmful, who was looking to inflict, harm to anybody in any way. So this really instilled in me this sense of empathy. And that was honestly one of the most beautiful gifts that my brother has given to me, that, just because somebody maybe looks different from you, at the end of the day, we're all connected, and so it doesn't mean that there's not something beautiful inside, and you really shouldn't judge based upon what you see, on the outside. And it was painful for me as well to see that, and to see the people who were moving away, from, because it's this feeling, right, of rejection, essentially. Yeah. And I felt that at myself, not just for him, but I also felt it myself as the sibling, like they're rejecting both of us because I'm part of this, and that was something that has been a big theme in my life in terms of understanding belonging and finding belonging, and just being accepting towards everybody, regardless of ethnicity, regardless, of whatever is on the outside. And because it's really what's on the inside that's the most important.
I think you hit on something that's really accurate that people may not have thought of before. And I've thought of this recently myself. A lot of our aversions to people, or fears, even, as you say, is that it's just not even a lack of education, but just a lack of exposure and a lack of experience. And as time is going by and we're having more awareness of disabilities and of just differences between each other, I think it can only help us to recognize that, you and I don't look the same. We don't talk with the same accent. We don't, our hair is very different,
it doesn't mean that we can't connect with each other. But I think a lot of those, almost like a hatred level that comes in, I think it's a response to fear and not knowing, because it's something that we're totally uncomfortable with and we're not sure what to do. And I say we, just general people in general, we all have something that we have a hard time connecting with, and we respond differently. Some people run right toward it because they want to know more. They're curious. They want to understand more. I love traveling around the world and meeting new cultures, but I don't want to just visit for a day. I want to stay for a week, for a month, because I want to learn why we behave differently, because it's the same mindset. We just respond differently because of our cultural background or our experiences. But we don't necessarily do that when we meet someone who may be in a wheelchair, or,
Mm.
instead we just kind of walk on by and we don't take that time to stop. And it's part of what I'm hoping to do with the podcast, is that as we're exposing people to new individuals and new situations that they haven't personally had a chance to interact with, hopefully they're opening their mind a little bit more and decreasing those fears and those concerns there. I hate that you and your brother faced that, but I know a lot of our listeners have been in similar situations. I meet parents all the time who won't leave their home to go out in public because they just get tired of those stares or those very
Mm.
inappropriate comments that are made.
Mm.
And not everyone has the strength within to say, come on over and ask us any questions. Well, I have met some who can do that, and they would rather you come and just ask questions, even if they seem rude, just because it's going to help you understand more. But that's an invasion of your space too, so you don't always have that.
Mm.
Well, your family, what you've told me about what your family has done in response to your brother. So he was 4 years older than you were. Before I get into my next question, I wanted to ask you, when was he diagnosed? Was he a young child or was he older?
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking,
No, very young. He was probably around 4 years old. The story that my parents told me was it was about that age where you normally take the kids, to preschool, and then you drop them
right.
off. And what happened was they took him and they tried to drop him off because they didn't know. At that point, he seemed, everything seemed totally kind of status quo. And he cried and cried and cried and cried. And eventually the teacher called and said, "You have to come back and get him." And that's when they knew that something was off. And so yeah, it was shortly
Interesting.
after that he was diagnosed. Yeah.
About what year would that have been?
Let me think. He would have been 47, so if he was around 4, that would have been uh 43 years ago. So that would have been in
Yeah,
it's
so
going to take
it's
a moment.
24 right now, so 80,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, around
79, 80,
1980.
somewhere in
That's
there.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
But the
around
reason
that.
I'm asking is autism was not readily diagnosed until later into the 80s. So he and your family were fortunate that they had a doctor who knew what they were looking at and were able to help identify what was going on. Just the more people that I've talked to, that
Mm.
was kind of a gray area of time where there were a lot of questions still, and we really didn't know a lot. And so much has developed since then. But that's when you had mentioned earlier about his age, it made me wonder. He was
Mhm.
one of the ones who was able to get that diagnosis earlier.
Yeah, I'm sure it didn't happen right away. I'm sure that they probably went to a few. I mean, I would go back and check with my mom, but I'm sure it wasn't an immediate thing that they probably had to go and see a couple of, doctors before they finally got the diagnosis. That's
Well, and I've talked to other adults who have been diagnosed as adults because of the same of that gap in time where they really didn't understand what it was and it wasn't recognized, but they later were able to get a diagnosis. So they went years and years without a name. That was the only difference. The adjustment time that they needed, they were getting their needs met, but it was just this unknown out there. They really didn't know, or it was a misdiagnosis where it was called something else, but as we learned more as a population, they kind of were able to get a better label as far as what it was. And not everyone needs a label. I know for my family with my daughter, when she was little, she's visually impaired. I just needed a name because that helped, as we talked about people responding funny, as the well-meaning grandmas who would come by in the grocery store and go in to comment about my child and then would back up and ask what was going on with their eyes. it was a lot easier to have a name of something, just to say, well, she has albinism. And then they may not have known what that was, but at least it gave me something easy to say and not to have to explain everything. So I think sometimes it does help to have a label. As much as we don't like to label each other, it does help to give even our kids a tool to be able to say, this is why I need some extra help, or this is why I need to wear my headphones. And everyone's going to be different on that. So parents that are listening, I'm not telling you to tell your child that they have a label. That's not what I'm saying at all. But as a parent, sometimes it does help you to kind of know, as you're looking for support organizations and all, to know where you're looking and where you're getting help. Well, so given the time period that you were in, your parents had did well, I would say they didn't have as many supports as are out there today. And so you shared with me, and I don't know if you say it as ALAW or ALAW, but tell me what that is and how did it get started?
Yeah, so ALAW stands for Autism Living and Working. And so what happened with my brother, his journey is that when he got to be a teenager, he could no longer live at home. He became violent, and it was not and my parents didn't honestly know how to navigate the situation. They tried different resources. I remember at one point we all went to Children's Hospital, saw a therapist. It wasn't, but it's not it's not your atypical behavior, because he has autism. And so there was medications as well, putting him on medications, changing the medications. This was a whole long process. And so what they did at one point was they found a school and they sent him to the school. It was called Devereaux, and he was there until around, I would say, from maybe age 15 to 24. He was very unhappy at the school because it was kids who had all sorts of different developmental disabilities. It wasn't just autism. I don't really feel like they necessarily knew the best way to support him, but he was quite vocal about how unhappy that he was, and it wasn't an option for him to live with my parents anymore. So what happened was, what was founded ALAW, my parents met two other parents of autistic who had autistic boys. One of the parents actually has both a son and a daughter with autism, and so they came together with the parents to ask for funding from the government. And with that funding, they created ALAW, Autism Living and Working, which was this organization to support these men. They got a house in Phoenixville, which is about 45 minutes outside of Philadelphia. My parents were living in Philadelphia. And then they also had staff that were there 24/7. So the staff to cook for them, to help them with things like brushing their teeth. One of the men did not have speech. My brother was quite talkative. I mean, he would talk your ear off, about the same things typically, but he would talk. And so he really needed the man who did not talk, Matthew. He would type, like when he wanted to say something, he would type it on his computer. But so they had staff there to basically to help them, and then also to do activities with them to help them to integrate as well into society, like Meals on Wheels, or my brother was working a few days a week. I forget maybe it was CVS. There were a couple of different places where he did simple things, if it was like stacking boxes, washing dishes was something that he did at one point, but something to get them so they're not in the house 24/7. There was one staff member that would take him to Planet Fitness a couple times a week so that he would, make sure that he got exercise. So that kind of support. So that was all funded by the government. There was an issue at one point when Republicans took charge of, because they wanted to cut the funding. And so my parents actually had to go to court, in order to petition to get a lifelong funding, because that's the other thing. Once the parents have passed, you want to make sure that your kids are supported, right, through all of that. So that's what that ended up being.
Wow. Yeah, we've talked last season. We had Amit Chala on to talk about just that lifetime planning for the future, and I have someone coming on later this season, that will be talking about that as well. Very important, because that is a big concern that most of our parents have. What happens after I'm not here anymore? How can I make sure that my child's ready and able to be cared for? So I'm glad you mentioned that. Excuse me. So you mentioned some of the things that they're doing with ALAW. I really like that idea. And you had told me before about Meals on Wheels. So what is why is it important for them to be out in society? You mentioned a little bit of that, but what are the benefits that it brings? And is it just for the guys themselves, or is it for others as well?
It's for, I think it's just as equally important for other people, maybe even more so, because, there's so many times when I would, as a sibling of somebody who had a disability, when I would try to explain to them, okay, my brother has a developmental disability, people wouldn't understand. Even when I would say, okay, he has autism, they really wouldn't get it. And they didn't get it until they met him. And they had a lot of times these preconceived notions. And, autism, there's a huge spectrum. I used to be a teacher, French and Spanish, high school teacher and middle school. And I had some kids who were on the spectrum, very high functioning, but we're talking Asperger's. What my brother, very, obviously different. But with him, when people met him, they interacted with him, then they understood. And I feel that that's really important. First of all, in terms of promoting tolerance, in terms of promoting connection, acceptance, empathy. And people need to understand that different is not bad. I mean, because these men were super gifted, all in their own way. I mean, my brother had this passion for trains. He remembered every single train. And he went to Paris when he was maybe 6 years old, and he remembered every single station. And when I would go to Paris, he would say, make sure you ride this line and make sure you do this station and this station, like a huge, very, very, very keen memory. So I feel like it's important for them also not to be completely isolated. Everybody, as humans, we need connection. Everybody, it's an innate need. So I feel that it's really, really important for for people who have developmental disabilities, yes, to be integrated into society, and for us to see that different is beautiful too. And because there, again, as we had said before, there's this perception of the other, and the other is something that we fear. We fear what we don't know. No, let's move towards connection instead, and embracing, in the spirit more of love, the thing that we don't understand. I think that's super important, because as we do this also as humans, even this most basic thing of connecting with somebody, for example, who has a developmental disability, and actually going and having a conversation with him. There was a man who used to come, and he would, with Michael, like, he would come visit once a month. He would take him out on walks, and his name was Henrik. Just talk to him and interact with him. And that creates a ripple effect in our world. It creates a ripple effect of healing, of tolerance. I know it seems like a small thing, but those little actions really do, they reverberate in terms of the collective society. So it's very important.
Yeah, no, I completely agree on that. So as our parents that are listening, the rate of autistic diagnosis is much higher now than it was when your brother was diagnosed. So a lot of our listeners may have a child who's on the spectrum. What would you tell them as far as how to find the right resources for their children? A lot of them aren't sure where to get started. And now your family went out and created this. From what you know, from what you've seen, how would you advise them on getting started with trying to get that support?
I think the most important part, the first piece, is the community connection. So making sure that you yourself as a parent have the support that you need. So I would say connecting first and foremost to other parents or siblings or people who have, who have family members with a developmental disability, and see, okay, what was your journey? How did you handle it? I think that never underestimate the power of word of mouth. And so I really feel that, when you have a need and you put that out into the universe will bring you support. And I think it's also very empowering to just see other people who have been through that, who have been through the experience. So that you're not alone, so that and so that you too, it's so important that the parents have support for themselves as they go through this journey, not just because you're in this caregiver role, right? You just are. That's naturally, and the caregiver role, it's beautiful, but it also can be very, very draining. And so you need to make sure that you have your self-care and you have all those practices in place to make sure that your cup is being filled. Because if it's not being filled, it's going to be hard for you to fully, give as well to your child. So that would be my first and foremost, just would be my piece of advice, is to really tune into your own network and talk communicate, talk to the people who have had family members with disabilities, and see what their journey was like, see what their recommendations are.
So last week we were talking about neurodivergent children and using music therapy. And listeners, if you were listening to that one, we told you to let us know if you're having trouble finding resources. I want to repeat that again for this one. If you're out there feeling isolated and you don't know where to start, leave a comment on this or send us an email. Let us know, and we'll get you connected where we have connections. And I think it's so important that you have those connections with other parents. Not always with specialists. Sometimes you just need to talk to another mom or another dad, and to just share those like experiences that you've had. And as we said earlier, the spectrum is such a broad range. No two children are going to be the same, but that doesn't really matter because you're looking for a parent who you can connect with. And so that self-care part and making sure that you're taking care of yourself is very important. So thanks for emphasizing that.
And I would say also, don't underestimate the power of social media for connection, because nowadays, social media, you go, for example, on Facebook, there are groups, there are community groups. You can find, support in terms of, okay, there is a Facebook group, I'm sure, for parents who, have children with autism. You can find that.
There are quite a few, yes.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to help you find that. If you don't know how to do it, just let us know. We will get you connected. We're collecting as many resources as we can to try to help you as a parent be stronger and be able to find the path that you and your child need. So this season we've been working as part of the interview with having each of my guests complete a statement that has something to do with what we've talked about. So I'm having a hard time explaining that with each of these interviews. So maybe by 6 months into this year, I'll get this down. But listeners, you're starting to hear a little bit more on this. And some of these statements will be used to help promote the episode. But I've asked Sarah to answer 3 for me. So I'm going to say the statement, and then I'm going to have Sarah, I'm going to have you repeat it and then finish the statement for me. All right. So the first one is, having a sibling with autism has shown me that the most important thing is.
Having a sibling with autism has shown me that the most important thing is empathy and connection.
All right. So the second one, for families navigating a loved one's autism diagnosis, the best advice I can offer is to.
The best advice that I can offer is to seek support, in particular from and connect with other parents who have been on a similar journey.
All right. And the final one, when it comes to individuals with autism, it's important to remember that.
It's important to remember that each individual has their own beautiful magic inside, just waiting to be discovered, and their own gifts to share with the world. So get curious about that.
We've been talking about your experiences with your brother, but you have a whole life apart from that. So tell me about any projects you're working on, how our listeners can connect with you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, I am an astrologer and a life coach, and also a holistic healer. So I combine astrology with life coaching to help people who are navigating major life transitions to find self-empowerment and create the life of their dreams. And so I was living in China. I'm now in Philadelphia for now. And so, yes, if there's anybody who is seeking support when it comes to navigating a big life transition, would love to connect. I'm on all the social media. I do a lot of videos on Instagram in particular, which talk about what's happening in the cosmos energetically, how you can work. We just had this big lunar eclipse that happened in Libra. So, how to work with the energy. Also videos on navigating big transitions in your life, on finding peace, in the moment. Also, when it comes to transitions, the things that you can't change, so finding peace and surrendering to change and finding gratitude in the moment. So you can connect with me on social media. My social media handle is Sarah, SARAHSOUL boss. My website is sarahsoulboss.com. And I have a newsletter, which I publish twice a month, with more tips for ways to really connect with and align your energy. So please reach out. I would love to connect.
We'll put the links to to all of that in the show notes too. So if you're listening on the audio, you may have to go to the website link to get to that. I'm having a hard time getting the show notes to show up on Apple Podcasts, but there is a link to the webpage. Everywhere else, it'll be linked at the bottom with the video or on the webpage itself. So Sarah, thanks for sharing today. I appreciate you bringing a different perspective here, but I appreciate you being open and just sharing too the creativity that your parents went to help support your brother and to give him a full life and not just to be sitting on the sidelines. So it's really exciting to know, even being early stages with working with adults with autism, that they had the forethought to be able to do this and to give him that, and to, I'm sure it's impacted what's happening today with other families. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and also just for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit about Michael's story. I feel that, in his memory, it's a beautiful thing, and hopefully it can help others.
Don't forget to sign up for the Water Prairie newsletter for updates on what's happening at Water Prairie, special promo codes available for our Etsy shop, and updates on our Amazon bookshelf. You can sign up at waterprairie.com/newsletter. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next week.